Welcome everyone. It's hard to believe that already a week has passed since we last got together for a live stream. Somehow in this weird time that we're in, time goes both too slowly and too quickly at the same time. I feel like I was just here yesterday. At the same time, I feel that so much time has gone by. I wonder if we're all feeling that, or if that's simply my own private temporal issue. Anyway, please bear with me because today I'm a little bit disorganized, so I hope that by the end of this live stream I will actually have become organized enough so that you can understand what I have actually been trying to say. First of all, of course, I hope that everyone is in very good health. I hope that everyone is safe, and that we're all still following our social distancing norms, I would call them. We are in a very difficult time now, a very dangerous time, I should say, because little by little the world is opening up. Many things in Asia, of course, have opened up considerably, and countries there have been dealing with the pandemic in a way which is a model for the rest of the world. It's a terrible shame that in Europe, and especially in the United States, it's not fall. Let me see. Was something there? Okay, good. Little things happen here. But in the US, in Europe as well, countries are opening. In the United States, states are opening up. People are going out, and without enough testing and without, I would say, enough consideration of other people, there is a great possibility that we will have a second wave of this horrendous pandemic. And that's something that everybody in the world must do all we can to avoid. This another lockdown of our societies would be totally disastrous. In the meantime, as we open up little by little, we still must keep our small community, small cultural community together, and I hope that with my doing this, I add at least a little bit to our sense of community. So with that said, I'll explain what I was thinking about discussing today, and that has to do both with perhaps a short history of the clarinet, since I do play the clarinet, and what should I say again? Quoting Harold Bloom, the great literary critic, should say an explanation of the misreading of musical history in a certain sense. That's okay. With that said, I'll begin simply with this short history of the clarinet, and we can start then with the chalumeau here, and I haven't warmed up any of these instruments. Generally they should take a long time to warm up. Let's see. Now, the chalumeau is usually called the precursor of the clarinet, and I'm sure that many of you actually know all about this. Some of you probably know a lot more than I do. But for those of you who don't, I hope that this will be interesting, at least. Now, the chalumeau here has two keys, and it looks like a recorder, but its primary feature is that it is actually a cylindrical instrument. And that gives it a small range here. Sorry, let me get this. And with the two keys here, it goes up a whole step to what would be a written B natural. This way, and you notice that the two keys are at the same level. Okay, so from this, I will move actually quickly. I'm not going to play. Actually, before that, I should mention one thing, that the chalumeau had the possibility of being very, very expressive. That's with this large mouthpiece here and the large reed. And it had this bloom of sound, and it's something that I will actually be speaking about in a little while. Okay, now we can move, and I don't have actually operational any kind of 2-key or 3-key clarinet, so I will go to a 5-key instrument and sort of explain the difference. This is a copy of a Fröhlich clarinet, this way, and we see again these two keys, but they're in very different place. And for those of you who are wondering, I will explain about that. And then there were 3 more keys, and this was the standard key setup for basically the 18th century and for part of the 19th century too. So now, the big innovation of the clarinet was the moving of this key here to a higher position, and at the same time creating a smaller hole, so that basically that could elicit the third partial, if you remember from our very first session here. And what's interesting, if you actually calculate, and this is 1, 2, 3, you'll find that it pretty much breaks the tube into 3 parts, which would be the third partial. Okay, this innovation is generally attributed to Joseph Denner, and I think it's, although interesting, not so important who in fact invented it. It's simply that there was a realization that with the chalumeau, let's go back to that. The problem was that people thought, perhaps, yes, I think I'm going down because I'm trying to reach these instruments. I have to go up. Okay. That the chalumeau, that the common understanding was that an instrument would overblow at the octave. The recorders did that, flutes did that, oboes did that, and the chalumeau somehow didn't. So what, I mean, That was a little bit of a problem. Yes. I made it worse on purpose, I must say, but it is funny. So someone realized that all of a sudden, if you do yeah, I can't even get that on this instrument. But that if you actually move this, you can get a 12th. And with that, the clarinet was born. And this basic setup, as I said, was the main way that the clarinet was built for, I would say, close to 100 years. Now, what happened with it? What should I say? The clarinet played higher notes very well. The low register was always a bit problematic. So, with these 5 keys, you get those notes going up to the written A, and B flat is a little bit approximate, B natural. You don't have a double hole, and generally the clarinets did not have this double hole. That note did not exist. You could kind of half hole it this way, but it was very approximate. Sometimes you had a double hole here so that you could get that way, and that sort of worked all right. And after, E flat's possible, a little bit tricky. E natural is good. F, many different fingerings were possible to try to bring that into more or less a correct pitch. F sharp got better. The G sharp, not bad. And then all the other half steps work very well, of course. This is why, if we look at the history of the clarinet, there are basically, through the 18th century, no melodies in the low register. What the low register could do very well were arpeggios. And the primary notes on these clarinets were very well in tune. As you get farther away from them, there were problems with intonation, but as you went up, there were many ways, I should say, to actually correct the intonation, so that you could use the register key, for instance. So if I wanted to play if I wanted to go lower or higher, I could use that. Things this way, and so this is the basic explanation of the 5-key instrument and both the strengths and problems of the old clarinet. Okay. Then we go farther, and the next clarinet I will show is more sorry. This is similar to an instrument which Heinrich Behrmann would have played. extra key here, which is a key I basically don't use. But it's that way. Let's go on. Once again, can everyone hear me? Yes, yes, yes. This introduction probably is a little boring, but it'll get better, I think. You see me struggling in the morning with these instruments, which really need more time for their blooming. So I do this. All right, take this reed, which is not the greatest. And we have this wonderful instrument. I do something which perhaps was not quite so traditional, I would say. I actually put a thumb rest on it here. So-called purists will actually castigate me for doing things like that, but I think as a part-time period instrument player, I think this makes things much easier. I'll explain more about actually the thumb rest in a second. But of course, with the addition of keys, you had much greater flexibility. I know, I keep going down. Okay. I have much greater flexibility in playing chromatic lines, etc. So with the addition of these keys by time of that Weber wrote, his works for Berman, who played I believe 9-key instrument, you actually had all the chromatic notes possible on the instrument. The other thing you had was a great choice of fingering for timbre. So I could play, for instance, that way. These notes, which were special before, could be actually open now. And this way, and even with this kind, with a G sharp, you could have different fingerings, which could give little bit different pitch and different color. And this is very interesting because it allows great choice of expression. And now I will come to basically the reason I'm doing this here. And the point is, what can we as musicians learn from history? In this case. And the most interesting thing, I believe, for music is to actually pick up these old instruments and find out what they do. So, playing these instruments in a certain sense is research. We have modern instruments, of course, and the development of the modern instrument, here, and I will take one out now, I guess, so that here, happened gradually through the 19th century was one of evenness. So that finally, you have all these notes possible in a very even way. But when you're dealing with composers such as Mozart, and even later on, they did not necessarily expect evenness. Even though the pressure of history throughout all instruments, I would say design, was towards evenness. Even with the piano, for instance, again, the direction was toward sustaining even sounds this way. Okay, so coming back to a modern instrument, it is very even this way. It's also, in a certain way, neutral. That means that you have the possibility, if you have knowledge, to play in different ways. But the instrument itself will not necessarily lead you in that direction. I would say it would lead us in a certain way in a kind of Wagnerian direction where we want to sustain sounds. That's very good. That's what these instruments do better than anything else. So I go back to the old instruments, and I come back to this one here. Something like that has a natural kind of sense of some notes being more, some notes being less. We can make the F sound, this written F, of course, that in a way like the E, but the instrument doesn't want to go there. So, maybe the point is that you don't need to. We go in low register, for instance, and then always this note would be a little bit covered. This way. Could be a little more open than this, perhaps in clarinet, but anyway would be covered in relationship to other notes. And that becomes very important a little later in this live stream. But perhaps again, instead of playing that, trying to make that sound that way, perhaps you don't need to. This way. Another way also. You play the F sharp that way, has a kind of this sort of pathos to it. You go up, and then you go to the G sharp. Has this fantastic, in a certain way, instability, which can be very useful. So, having explored an instrument like this, then when we go to a piece of music, we can think, well, this is the instrument which the composer knew. And if we take, for instance, Mozart, and I'll be talking a lot about Mozart in a little while, he had uncanny knowledge and intuition about the instruments which he knew. And he was always interested in a certain way what was cutting edge at the time, and that will become important also in a second. But we can look at his music now and see perhaps that his choice of notes, his choice of key also, had a lot to do with the expression which he wanted the instrument to produce. That's right. So, if you have sorry about that last one note, but so in this little bit from it's a romanza from Gran Partita, we can say that our first note, perhaps, if we're playing it this way, has a kind of little bit of a covered feeling. And that is open. I do believe that Mozart was thinking of that. And then, again, that is a little bit that way, in a certain kind of, not rough, but so we go to a modern instrument then. And of course, this is our modern pitch. We have to do it. It's very hard for me to get used to this quickly, this old pitch, but it gives me lots of trouble. But so we can actually try to feel that way, even though the instrument doesn't tell us to do that. Now, how do we know that this is actually what Mozart intended? And this has very much to do with this, I would say, the philosophical problem of what's called original intent. And I, together with Harold Bloom, firmly believe that what I'm doing now involves, in a certain way, a creative misreading of perhaps what was, because we have no idea. But what this does is it evokes a specific kind of imagination. And that imagination can create art in itself, can inspire us to do something which perhaps is maybe original, but in any case gives a new understanding of what we're doing. And if there's any kind of progress in art, and of course I don't actually believe that there is, there's just change, that's what this progress is all about. Okay, let's look at the instruments a little more, and then I'm going to go to actually sources to speak about that a bit. So I come back to this instrument, and let's see what else can these instruments do, which the modern instruments perhaps have a little more trouble doing. And one thing they can do is that way. It's fantastic articulation. And if we read sources from people who actually talked about, or I should say wrote about, technique of wind instruments, like Bachofen, for instance, who was a clarinetist and composer who lived in the beginning of the end of the 18th century into the 19th century, and he did describe what he thought was maybe current clarinet playing. And I will speak a bit about that now. Most importantly, he spoke about articulation. He was not the only one. You have from earlier, you have the flutist Quantz, you have other people as well. And they all spoke of many different kinds of articulation. So it's not simply that in a wind player you can tongue a note or you slur it. No, there are many different ways of producing the articulation. So you can actually use the tongue, and they be different syllables. So that way, you can tongue with the lip. There were people. That way. There were ways of tonguing with just the air. So you just huff the note. That could be done slowly or it could be done fast. That way. Articulation could be combined. So you can come do a tongue this way and a huff at the same time. There were double tonguing. It was very, actually I would say rather common. And there were different kinds of double tonguing also. And the double tonguing would be goo goo goo, do 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 do. That way. And about double tonguing, there's something very interesting. This again is Bachofen, because he described how at the time when he was writing the book, around 1800, I don't remember the exact date myself, he said about 50% of players played this way, and 50% played with the mouthpiece down. And you wonder, interesting. And the Italian style was very much up, and actually that stayed, in fact, into the 20th century. I have to say, German style was more down, but other people did many ways. So you have Wilhelmin, the English clarinetist, when his sort of paintings of his or sketches of his with the clarinet, actually is like this. So there's no intrinsic reason why one is actually better than the other. We're used to this. And what Bachofen wrote was that when the mouthpiece is down, you have greater control over tone quality. And when the mouthpiece is up, you have more flexibility of articulation. And actually, that's true. So if I'm playing this way here, and I'm not a big expert on this kind of, but the articulation is really articulate on the reed. They articulate on the mouthpiece. That way. So there is something really to be said for that here. But of course, when you're here, because the jaw can actually manipulate the pressure here and the position much more easily, you do have greater control over tone quality. So, how do you reconcile these two different parts? Perhaps you don't. But I actually do a particular kind of double tugging where I don't touch the reed, but I touch the mouthpiece here. Okay, I'm just throwing that out, and I don't know if I'll actually talk about that. Okay, maybe I will. We'll see. But I will, at some point, speak about the normal ways of practicing double tugging. Okay, so that's that. Now we go to a more important subject, which has to again do with the expression which the instruments lead us to actually communicate to people. And what I like very much is to look at different treatises for playing instruments, and I'm especially fond of the ones by Gemignani. This Francesco Gemignani, who was a great violinist, and this is a facsimile of a contemporary English translation of one of his treatises. And I like very much Leopold Mozart's treatise on the violin. I think they both give tremendous information about many, many aspects of playing. So I'll read you a couple here, which I find sort of cute. That's let me find what I need. Yes, because he's talking about ornamentation, and this is, so you have what he called the plain shake, which is the trill, the turn shake, which is the trill with the Nachschlag, the superior appoggiatura, the appoggiatura from above. And he said, the superior appoggiatura is supposed to express love, affection, pleasure. It should be made pretty long, giving it more than half a length or time of the note it belongs to, observing to swell the sound by degrees, and toward the end to force the bow a little bit. So, if it made short, it will lose much of the aforesaid qualities, but will always have a pleasing effect. And it may be added to any note you will. He liked the appoggiatura. Then you have the inferior appoggiatura, the appoggiatura from below, and he says it has the same qualities with the preceding, except that it is much more confined, and only can be made when the melody rises the interval of a second or a third, observing to make a beat on the following note. And that makes perfect sense. So that if you're playing, and rather than going for third, you can go intermediately to a second. But he was not in the majority when he said that the inferior appoggiatura, or it's not inferior actually, but the appoggiatura from below had to actually precede only a note which would be rising. Anyway, that's enough of that. Now this is more interesting. Holding a note. It is necessary to use this often. For were we to make beats and shakes continuously, without sometimes suffering the pure note to be heard, the melody would be too much diversified. Okay, and now another one, and this is for us extremely important. The swelling and softening of the sound. These two elements may be used after each other. They produce great beauty and variety in the melody, and employed alternately, they are proper for any expression or measure, as it said. Okay, and there's one more for that, and I will mention this, and this will be very important for us as well. And he calls it the close shake. This cannot possibly be described by notes in the former examples. To perform it, you must press the finger strongly upon the string of the instrument and move the wrist in and out slowly and equally. When it is long continued, swelling the sound by degrees, drawing the bow nearer to the bridge, and ending it very strong, it may express majesty, dignity, etc., but making it shorter, lower, and softer, it may denote affliction, fear, and when it is made on short notes, it only contributes to make their sound more agreeable, and for this reason, it should be made use of as often as possible. Interesting, because what is this? This is vibrato, and this is something we were talking about earlier, especially in relationship to Brahms and to Mühlfeld, and to the fact that while nowadays a big deal is made of the fact that Mühlfeld used vibrato. Uh-oh, do we have a problem? No, okay, sorry. I could not find any contemporary reports about vibrato in Mühlfeld's playing. So, most likely, the use of vibrato was something which was more normal. And that's important for us to realize now. There's more in Gemignani, but it's very, has very interesting little things. And of course, he gives noted examples of. So this gives us information too. Perhaps information which once again we can misread. Now I go to Leopold Mozart, and he was very technical about reading about writing about the way to bow, way to put the finger on the string for a violin, and for instance, he says we can go up or down with the bow, and you'll always get something like this, if we can see. You see that? Okay. Okay. So, remember Gemignani talking about the swelling and decreasing of the dynamic when you're drawing the bow. Here, uh-oh, I hope I'm doing this. I did something wrong. Open. No. Because I wanted to get something more here. You see, and so, Leopold Mozart, here we go. Actually, in a more technical way, describes how you do this. Here's another one, for instance. You see, here, do you see, can you see that in the second? See? No, the top one, yes. Okay. Okay. Was it okay? Shall we do this again? It's all right? I know.
Yeah, but,
bear with us,
yeah,
bear with us. But I have to hold it steady.
But you should not move.
Okay, I don't move.
Yeah, I'm moving there.
Okay. All right? Okay, it's good enough. Yeah. The interesting thing for me, though, is that of all his exercises that Leopold Mozart gives and his explanations, the one thing that he doesn't do is try to explain how to make an even sound which sustains the same way from beginning to end. Okay? This is most important. Now I will go to one more. There are many things that are so interesting in his book, and what I like very much is that he gives exercises, and then he gives these little statements, which are actually pretty funny. That's so I want to try to keep going. Let me see. Here we go. It should be in chapter 12. Okay, and he starts to talk about ornamentation. And there, right? Okay. Here I will go. Just a lot about trills and mordents and things like that. And one thing which interests us so I will find it. Many different things. This is 11, chapter 11. I need chapter 12. I'm not. Seem to be in the wrong place. Maybe it's back here. Hold it. Sorry about that. I had this put in the right place, and then I didn't. Okay, I know where I will get this in another, so that it has a nice little drawing here. But I will, here we go. I did find it. Okay. Yes. He has a good thing. A good, rather large section about the tremolo. And tremolo was actually how he described, once again, vibrato. And I read about that. The tremolo is an ornamentation which arises from nature herself, and which can be used charmingly on a long note, not only by good instrumentalists, but also by clever singers. Nature herself is the instructress thereof, for if we strike a slack string or a bell sharply, we hear after the stroke a certain wave-like undulation, ondaggiamento, as he said, of the struck note. This trembling after sound is called tremolo, or as we call it, vibrato. Take pains to imitate this natural quivering on the violin when the finger is pressed strongly down on the string and one makes a small movement with the whole hand, which, however, must not move sideways, but forward toward the bridge and backward toward the scroll. Of course, that makes sense. Of which some mention has already been made in Chapter 5, etc., etc. For as when the remaining trembling sound of a struck string or bell is not pure, and continues to sound not only on one note, but sways first too high, too low, just so by the movement of the hand forward and backwards, you must endeavor to imitate exactly the swaying of these intermediate tones. It's rather complex about vibrato, I would say. Now, because the tremolo is not purely on one note, but sounds undulating, so it would be an error if every note were played with the tremolo. Performers there are who tremble consistently on each note. They tremble as if they had palsy. Palsy, that's the shakes, that's right. So, the tremolo must only be used at places where nature herself would produce it, namely as if the note were taking, where the striking of an open string at the close of a piece or the end of a passage, which closes with a long note. That last note would inevitably, if struck, for instance, on the pianoforte, continue to hum for a considerable time afterwards. Therefore, closing note or any other sustained note may be decorated with the tremolo. And then he actually has different kinds of tremolo. So he outlines different kinds of vibrato. He has three kinds. There's slow, increasing, and rapid. Larger strokes can represent quavers. In other words, larger notes can have a slower vibrato, and the smaller notes can have a faster vibrato. And then he even expresses here how to produce rhythmical vibrato. You see, so it's within a passage like this. Can you see it? Yeah. Okay. This is all.
Two questions.
Well and good. What? Two?
There's two questions.
Yes. Okay.
TV asks if it maybe also means right hand vibrato by tremolo.
No. This he's talking very much. It's on the string, left hand, and is, as he says, moving up and down slightly. That's it. So this is vibrato. The tremolo this way he actually describes in a very different way. I'm not bothering with that. Okay.
One more question.
Yes.
By Yuhan Choi, really good clue and hints. Is it possible to apply for piano?
Well, this is so interesting because, we have to find the keyboard of his time when you have it. And with the parallel strings and not as much tension on the string, often there would be an after touch of a vibrato. But of course, it's not something that performer can do. However, on an instrument which was called the clavichord, the small instrument which had a hammer which was directly in touch with the string, not indirectly the way the pianoforte has been built. There you could actually press and by moving your finger create a vibrato. And that's an instrument which, for instance, Bach loved to play. Many people did. It was very intimate. It wasn't very loud, but it had the possibility of a vibrato. So this sense of that people never played with vibrato, etc., is of course total nonsense. Yeah, that way. What Leopold Mozart objected to is probably something that many people even nowadays would object to, which is use of a kind of consistent, unwavering vibrato, which he said reminded him of someone who had palsy, which at that time would be the shakes, you could say. Even with wind instruments, we do not have great knowledge of vibrato, although we do have, especially for the flute, hand vibrato, finger vibrato, mentioning a finger vibrato. So if I'm playing here, for instance, you can do that way. And it does have use, perhaps on the clarinet too, but we do have a little letter from Mozart where he objected. He said, "Okay, you're okay. I keep looking and thinking that everything is gone blank or something of that sort." Mozart actually reprimanded and said, Raum, his good friend, the oboist, he said, "You played with too wide a vibrato. I have a feeling that Raum had problems with his teeth," which led to kind of instability in his sound. You know, we don't get that. We don't know things like that particularly. And of course, this is another one of my misreadings. But that is perhaps the case. Okay, what shall we deal with now? Yes, we're going on more. But I just wanted, before we go specifically to Mozart, specifically to the concerto, I wanted to mention that Anton Stadler's playing was considered to be closest to the human voice. After his performance with the Grand Partita, there's a wonderful letter and quotation from someone actually stating that. Now, would that mean that perhaps he had vibrato? Okay. And I will go back to this clarinet first, and there are a couple things about it which are very notable when we play. First of all, it is that what the instrument doesn't do so well is sustain the even note. That's what Leopold Mozart was not interested in. So if I'm playing, it becomes actually rather unpleasant. Instead, the note has a kind of normal shape which describes its length. While it may not have a natural vibrato, there is a natural kind of instability in sound, which I described also with the Ottensteiner instrument later. And on certain notes, a lot of instability, as I mentioned with this, for instance, A-flat. Which in fact perhaps leads to a kind of natural vibrato. Okay. Shall we move now to the guest of honor?
May I have one question?
Yes, please.
I mean, this is like a Teruma-kun asking why many modern clarinetists not use vibrato.
Why not? Yeah?
And then
Okay.
I think another wind instrument greatly use vibrato.
Yes. Okay. Who knows? Basically, you know, that's in a way, this is a complicated subject. In a way, this is a sad subject. Because there was a time... Here, I have to...
This phantasm.
I will show. It's unfortunately, I can't really stand up with this instrument right now. But I will show what I can do. So what was I saying? There was a time when there were really very separate national schools of playing, and they had very different characteristics. For instance, the Czech school in the Czech Republic and Slovakia early on was characterized by two things. First, a very pronounced vibrato, and also by a great ability to double tongue, for instance. Earlier, the English school, very much represented by someone such as Jack Brymer, who was a wonderful clarinetist, wonderful musician, was, of course, also a school which used vibrato as a matter of normal playing. Okay. Now we go to France, and we see that Debussy's Dedicati, Mimart, was a clarinetist who advocated the use of vibrato as well. So, the world coming to, in classical music, to play without vibrato, basically, is actually a pretty recent phenomenon, I would say. Even some very early German recordings we can hear, and we can hear sometimes a vibrato. And there's a recording of Simeon Belasin, who was the wonderful clarinetist who played in the New York Philharmonic between the World Wars. And he originally came from St. Petersburg, and he played Übel clarinets, German system instrument, and he was very much against the idea of vibrato. I know that especially because my father was a student of his. He was also a student of Daniel Bonnard, as so many of the older generation of American players were. Now, what I found curious was that Belasin recorded the Mozart Quintet, and in that recording, you hear a definite vibrato in his playing, even though he was always against it. So I asked my father about that. My father told me, you know, he was just too nervous. So it ended up to be with a vibrato despite his predisposition against it. So anyway, that's the case. There's another point, though. Okay. I have to keep this up all the time. I know, but my chair is just too low. Another point, which has to do, and for that I think I will use, I use this, I think, but I can't use it exactly that way, so I have to use this here. Okay, so our modern instruments now are made for great stability, basically. Why don't you take this off? I'll explain what this is, perhaps. But it's for other things. But okay. Normally I play a better reed, but they're made for so that they play at a particular pitch this way in a very stable way. Now, if you make the vibrato will often dip down and will sound a little flat or flaccid. Of course, in jazz world and in folk music all around the world, the clarinet is played with vibrato. Quite big. And their mouthpieces, of course, as opposed to classical mouthpieces, are much further open, which allows this kind of instability. And this particular mouthpiece I'm playing is very close and very stable in that way. I do that now simply for fun. But anyway. So the instrument doesn't naturally lend itself to a vibrato, but that doesn't mean that you should not or cannot use it, I think. And I'm actually hoping that the world will now open up a little more once again, so that the idea of using vibrato on the clarinet becomes more common or more respected, I should say, in the classical world. Okay, so let me go back now to what I was dealing with. And this idea of instability and vibrato, I hope, will become a little clearer as I actually go to Mozart. And what I need is, I hope this is the reed that I want. And this is as close as we can come, pretty much, to an understanding of the instrument which Anton Stadler played. Now, can you actually see this as it's going up? Can we see that? Okay. The music historian Pamela Poulin found in Riga an advertisement for a concert of Anton Stadler playing his new bass clarinet, as he called it. And it looked very much like this. There was a drawing in this advertisement, and it looked very much like this way. Although this was a little bit turned a different way. And the bell faced inward. There were also descriptions of Stadler's instrument, where it was said, for instance, that there were so many keys that it was impossible to see the wood. Now you wonder what exactly that meant, but I will describe the keys which probably it had to have. Okay. actually a long time ago, since these instruments need time, which we seem to have. Okay. Do this, I think, here. This way. I don't go all the way down. Let me see. So first, we wonder about the bell, which faced inward, and of course when people saw that drawing in the advertisement, the first reaction was, of course that has to be wrong. You know, the bell should always face outward somehow. But of course, if it faces outward, just take a look at how unbalanced the instrument is. If it faces inward, the instrument comes into a very nice kind of natural balance. And then with the hold facing upwards, when it's in here, it actually has very comfortable kind of support for just holding the instrument. This way. Yeah. So I think the drawing, of course, was correct. Which means that when we look at something, even though most likely we will misread, we should take what it is, what we are looking at, seriously, and not have preconceived notions actually interfere with what is there. So this is very, simple little example of why that's the case. So the big feature of this is that it has, first of all the chromatic low notes going down to a low written C. That way. And we know for sure that this is what Mozart wrote for, because there is a wonderful source, which is the Manuscript Fragment, which is dated perhaps from 1789. I actually believe it has to be from 1790 myself. And it's 199 measures of the first movement. This Manuscript Fragment has the basic tutti parts and the clarinet line complete until that point. I wonder if I will actually show you a bit of it. And what is clear is that all the low notes are there, so that all that is there, and then also so we have the E flat and the D flat, as well as the D and the C. There are, as far as I know, there are no actually basset horns from that period in existence now which have all those chromatic notes. So this was quite a special instrument. And Mozart did write earlier, even the quintet that he wrote, which he wrote really in 1790, that the quintet does have chromatic notes, but he uses them very sparingly. In the concerto, he uses them in a much more dramatic and meaningful way. And this is going to be the main point of what I'll be talking about now. Another key that Stadler must have had is the key for B natural. So as I mentioned earlier, if we hear this instrument, for instance, this is once again this Fröhlich clarinet earlier, even though you have sort of B flat, that's okay, and you can do something with it. That note is in between, and to do you have no. You cannot do any kind of half hole. You just have to. Something like that doesn't work. So there are people who said that, well, maybe you do half holes, something like that. But the main point is that Mozart was very concerned that what he wrote had to sound good. I don't believe he ever experimented with something which was ersatz or something which was problematic or something which was simply theatrical but would not actually have decent sound. And it's telling that before the concerto and this instrument, he basically did not use that note. So, I can actually see the following scenario. Let's say, I'll stand up, maybe it's better. Is that better? No. Tell me, what is better?
Sitting down is better.
Sitting down is better. Okay, I sit down and then I do it. So, let's say Mozart gets a knock at the door early in the morning, and so he comes out, he opens the door, and probably actually he wouldn't, but let's say he opens the door, and it's his friend Stadler. Now Stadler, of course, was not only his friend, he was the person who borrowed huge sums of money from him. And Stadler was an inveterate gambler, so Stadler says, "Oh, you lost at gambling again, you need money." And Stadler would say, no, this is different. Here. And he puts the instrument together, and he does this. Listen. And Mozart goes, "Wow! That's amazing. I didn't know you could produce that note on the clarinet." And what happens after that is he goes and writes what I believe is the first actual melody in the low register for the clarinet. Of course, it's for this basset instrument. But, and for that melody, he uses the two notes which you should avoid. Which was first, of course, the B flat or A sharp, which is okay if you're going to go up and down, something like that. But it's okay, but it's very unstable. And of course, the worst one is the B natural, which is there. And then we have that. Okay. What I should do now, I think, is go to the piano, and this is I cannot play this instrument with the piano, of course, but I can sort of outline certain things and then play, and hopefully this will be clear. Is there another question? No? Okay. So, I go, put this back, and I go to the piano, and the first thing, actually, no, I'm going to do the following. I will do this. Because I will take, to show the manuscript fragment, I'm sure that several people know this, but I'm surprised that many clarinetists actually don't know. And I will show, here it is. I'll start with one page. My pages are all falling apart right now, but here is part of it. Okay. You will notice one very interesting thing is that it's in G major, not in A major. Okay. I will come back to that in a while, but right now I will go to the part in question, which is here. Let's see if I can do this well. And this is very interesting. Can everyone see this? I should have my chopstick. I didn't have my chopstick today. That's okay. So I'll use the finger. See if this is. Do you see that? Is it clear? Okay. And originally, notice that the low notes, using those problematic notes, he did only once. He wrote. And then he went up, and then went on to the next part. Then he crossed that out and wrote bis, which means, of course, repeat, so that this phrase would happen 2 times. Of course, to understand why he did that, we need imagination, because it could work very well the way he wrote the first time. But I imagine that Stadler convinced him that it was possible. But he hesitated in the beginning. Okay, can you see? It's okay. Is that right? Yeah, I know I'm in the wrong place. Yeah? So, good. So we see that. Okay. Okay. He hesitated, and then finally, he gained confidence. Probably Stadler said, yes, I can do it. He says, okay. Interestingly, he doesn't do this ever again. And I think it was rather late, is it? No? Yeah, so I'm just going to say a little bit, and then I think I will continue this next time. Maybe that makes a lot of sense. I mentioned how this is in G major, and I just want to show you here, it's over here. That he does change to A major at the very end. This is right before. Find out where it is. Right from here, notice this pen mark here. And you have here a bass line which is clearly in A major. You see. Okay? Now this goes on simply to here. There's one more page, and that's measure 199, and that's as far as we have. The rest is lost. See, now the mystery is why and when he changed to A major. Because what is clear is that the handwriting and even the ink here is not so clear from this, of this bass line is different from what was before. If we see here, for instance, you see, so they are not at the same time, and when and how he changed is a mystery which at the moment we cannot solve. But we do have imagination. Are you okay? And for that, I actually am a big believer in something called Occam's razor. And people are going, huh? But William of Ockham, I think he was the 12th century, but I'm not exactly sure, was someone who actually stated a principle. And that principle was what allowed, in a certain way, science to progress. And that principle was basically that if there are two explanations, generally the simpler one is the one which is correct. Of course, that may not be exactly true, but I still think that it has great value. And I've read many things about why it was, there was the significance of A major, etc., 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 and the fact that this is at the end of Mozart's life. Of course, Mozart had no idea that it was going to be the end of his life. I think that took him very much, and probably very tragically, by surprise. So, my explanation, just knowing from the instrument, and when I don't have it here, but a basset horn in G, for instance, is harder to play. Simply, unless you're a giant, the fingers have a lot more tension because they're farther apart. So I have the sense that the A clarinet was much more comfortable and allowed more flexibility and more technical ease. Okay. So perhaps I stop now. Yes, but what I want to do is play as a postlude the Adagio from the concerto in a performance of mine with the wonderful Slovakian period chamber orchestra, Solamente Naturali, led by the fantastic violinist Milos Valent. So, here we try this, and hopefully this will work.
Not bad.
Here. Okay. Now it's beeping on white. Is that correct? Let me do this again. hopefully this will work. Let me make sure. I'm sorry for the delay. Ah, yes, I think it works. Okay, so this is the Adagio. Thank you. Bye now. Till next week, we will continue this.